Hi, I'm Radhika Gorur, and I'm here with my co-author, Margaret to introduce our paper, Leaning Too Far, PISA Policy and Australia's Top 5 Ambitions, which is the Discourse Editor's pick for October. Margaret and I are both very interested and concerned about the way statistics, particularly the numbers relating to large-scale assessments like OECD's PISA, are used in education policy. I was at the OECD a couple of years ago doing some interviews with OECD officials when there was a lot of fuss in the Australian media about Australia's slide in PISA rankings and the desire to ensure that we're in the top 5 in PISA. I asked one of the OECD officials I was interviewing what she thought about Australia's ambitions, and she said, "Top 5 in what?" I said, "In PISA," and she said, "Yes, but there are so many ways you can rank in countries in PISA. You can look at rankings based on the top scoring students or migrant students or of lowest SES students. So just saying top 5 in PISA is meaningless." I was immediately interested in working on some further analysis, and I decided to ask Margaret, who's the best person to ask really about this, because she's a statistician with a lot of knowledge about PISA data. And that's how this paper was born.
Thanks, Radhika. My motive for writing this paper came from my observation that assessment results had often been misinterpreted and misused, not only by the layperson but also by researchers and policymakers. And there are two main issues. The first is that all assessments have margins of error associated with the results, whether it is at individual student level or at the state or country level. And in many cases, these errors are quite large. The second issue is about the inferences that can be made from assessment results. If a school performed well in a test, we cannot immediately attribute the high performance to the school or to the effectiveness of the school. And similarly, if a country performs well in an international assessment, we can't jump to the conclusion that the country has the best education system. And this is because there are many factors that contribute to educational success, and the education system is but only one factor which usually plays a small part in student performance, quite surprisingly.
So Margaret and I got together to see how we could slice the PISA data in 3 different ways. Each analysis shows why it is not a good idea to base policy decisions on PISA rankings, which are based on national averages. First, we changed the unit of analysis. In PISA, big and small countries as well as provinces are all treated as if they were the same. But some countries, like Singapore, have very, very different policy and demographic characteristics than, say, a big country like the US. In Australia, the 8 jurisdictions have different demographic profiles. ACT always performs best, and Northern Territory always worst. This does not reflect efficiencies of the education system in these jurisdictions, but it reflects the differences in demographic profiles of the jurisdictions. Therefore, we simply cannot compare, say, the performance of Shanghai in PISA with the performance of Australia and draw conclusions about the effectiveness of teachers in these two regions. Some of Australia's states and territories, ACT and Western Australia, are already in the top 5 in PISA rankings. There's a lot of concern now that Australia is slipping in its mathematics scores. The chief scientist recently raised the issue in the media, and a series of changes to the math education have been suggested. But if we examine the rankings item by item, Australia does exceedingly well on some items, ranking first or second in these questions and beating the South Asian nations, but not so well in others. Again, we argue, this suggests that there is no widespread crisis in our math education. Rather, perhaps our curriculum does not align with PISA's priorities. There are, of course, differences in how interested and motivated students are in performing well on a test which has no personal consequences for them. In South Asian countries, students see performing well in these tests as a matter of national priority and pride, and they do their best to answer all the questions on the test. In contrast, Australian students leave out about 9% of the items. Since PISA is not a timed test, the likely explanation for leaving out unanswered items is that students are not motivated to complete the test. Perhaps if we could get more students to complete the test, our rankings would be much higher. So we can't conclude from these that, from the average rankings, that there is any kind of a policy measure that we can take.
Okay, so in conclusion, using these analyses, we argue that using the rankings, which are based on average performance scores, offers very little of value for policy. And to simply have the ambition of being in the top 5 in PISA, which is now inscribed in the Education Act, that has very little meaning. And average scores point to sweeping nationwide changes, national curricula, national assessments, and national teacher professional standards. And Australia is spending a lot of money based on a discourse of crisis in ways that may do little to improve its rankings. Now, given the lack of support for making inferences from assessment results, policies should not be made by PISA data alone. But to convince policymakers, instead of dismissing PISA data, we use those very data to show that basing policy on average scores would at best be ineffective and at worst damaging for Australia.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy our paper. Again, the title was Leaning Too Far, PISA Policy in Australia's Top 5 Ambition, and it's in Discourse, Volume 36, Issue 5. Thank you.